Now I'm not sure if you still remember this, but I had a chance to talk to you in two different clubhouse sessions, and in one
Yep.
of those sessions, you mentioned the phrase. Ang dami nitong quotable quotes nitong si Ron eh.
Uh-huh,
In
uh-huh.
one,
Mhm.
in one of those sessions, you said the phrase "pivot or persevere,"
Yep.
and that phrase really hit me in a good way because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, it made sense. You know,
Mhm.
we go through challenges with our lives, um, in our careers, businesses, and when we're pushed against the wall or when we hit rock bottom, sometimes ang iniisip lang natin, ang option natin, dalawa lang, quit
Mhm.
or push through. Pero yung sayo,
Mhm.
sabi mo, pivot or persevere, like as if giving up is not an option.
Mhm.
So for the listener's sake, I want to ask the biggest question of this episode.
Mhm.
I'm sure gusto nilang tanungin, Ron.
Mhm.
Kailan ba ako, when should I stop? And when should I do the thing that I pivot and persevere?
Mhm. So the key about pivoting and persevering, uh, always the key thing that you need to have in order to have a proper pivot or perseverance or whatever that might that term might be, it's data. Now, data, because a lot of people, and I'm a victim of this myself, is that I'm just naturally stubborn. So as you can see, I've already told you, I'm stubborn by default. Matigas ang olo. There you go, right? So this coconut is really hard headed by default. A lot of this before, again, just coming from a quote also that, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So the first thing I always have to look at is, am I yielding the same results that I'm getting, doing the same thing? If I want change, there needs to be a factor that I do also subtly. But in order for me to do that, I need to look at data. So if you apply it in your work, you have to look at, am I putting X amount of hours and this is the result? What if I change something? Then you make subtle changes. And pivots doesn't have to be 360-degree pivots.
Mm-hmm.
It can be subtle changes that you can measure data for. When you pivot, you don't have to commit to it totally. You can create little experiments that you can do. So, what are the things that you can apply this in your own podcast? Let's just say I have this term called podcast market fit. Again, very similar to what startups do. So, podcast market fit is basically, is your format um, solving the problem of your target audience. So there's two metrics that you want to measure there: quality and quantity. Quality is, are with whatever you said on that show for 30 minutes to an hour, did people stay and listen?
Mm-hmm.
And if your listeners did not stay at least 40% from start to finish, that means you're not keeping your audience.
You're doomed. no
Not really
matter
doomed.
no
You
matter
can,
how great and how the
yeah.
effort you put into that episode is,
Hmm.
parang gano'ng kaganda yan or whatever, if they didn't stay at even 40 minutes, 40% is high na eh. I think
Correct.
yung iba,
No,
they
if
leave
you
you at 20%, 25.
correct. So how do you improve that gradually? Do you change the topic? Do you change? Then you can now look at that data and how do you improve it? Do you change the format? Because you don't want to commit to something where only 20% will stay. Because even if you grow, that it's also directly correlated. So the quantity now is how many people are listening to your episode on an average, right? And again, everybody has a different trajectory. Hustleshare, to be honest, has plateaued. It's not, if you compare me to the Cool Pals, to Boiling Waters, to Tambalan, good luck. What I get in 1 month, they probably get in half an episode. So imagine that. So I'm not gonna play the FOMO effect.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, again, my it's for me, my success metric is different, right? But the constant thing would then be revolving around those two data sets that you can now look at to ask yourself, am I going to pivot or persevere? Pivot if you're not getting to that 40% as a benchmark worldwide, and pivot if you're not getting to around 100 to 200 listeners per ep. That means There's not enough people in too deep yet, and you can still make changes.
Changes.
Now, if you see that there is now a growth that there is, then you persevere. Because once you see a pattern and it's continuously growing month on month or week on week, then you're onto something. So you should just persevere. So to cut it short, pivot when you're not seeing the results that you want. Persevere is if you already see that there's a trajectory going towards your goal.
Okay, amazing. Pero ito, tatanong ko, because you also have your podcast, right? Were you having, was there a point in your podcasting
Mm.
experience, in your own show, now you had to decide, should I pivot or should I persevere? Because I think a lot, if the podcasters
Mhm.
are listening to this episode now, they think, yeah, I also have that. Sometimes I want to change my topic. That's why a number of
Mm.
podcasts would change their, suddenly iba na yung topic, sabi suddenly biglang
Yeah.
naging, they become, for sabi natin jologs ganyan, because
Mm.
they think that that's patok.
Mm.
But when they introduce the entire show, it's a different thing. And sometimes the others naman, for me, I stick.
Yeah.
I stick to what I have.
Yeah.
But the numbers are like painfully growing. Like siguro
Yeah.
one or two, ganyan. May
Yeah.
nadadagdag every now and then. But
Mhm.
whenever I see my data when I started versus not what I have now, it's growing. It's just that it's
Absolutely.
not as fast.
Yeah.
So
It's just a long
sometimes,
grind. Yeah.
yeah. So the question to us is, ano ba to? Will I still push this? Tigil ko na yung kalokohang podcast na to. Maybe it's
Right.
not for me. So
Mm.
if you, speaking as, a podcaster naman this time,
Mm.
not as, the CEO and
Mm.
co-founder of PNA, as a
Mm.
user, as a podcaster, ano naman yung naging experience mo? Did you pivot? Was there a time? Did you pivot or persevere, or, this was the
Yeah,
same
I
formula
pivoted.
before?
Definitely, I did pivot. I was lucky because I was able to get a captive audience also. So my analogy, which applies here all the time, is that you want to go into a blue ocean, right? Always blue ocean strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there are certain topics within the podcasting realm that just naturally competitive. That if you try to enter that without prior clout, it's going to be an uphill climb by at best.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, comedy. Good luck. No matter how funny you are, it's
If
going to
you
be
don't,
hard to
yeah,
compete
yeah.
with the Pulpals, with Alex Aleja,
You already
with
have
all
the
those love.
brand.
Yeah, and they have prior clout, so they have a ready
Mm.
audience to consume their content.
Mm.
Not saying it can't be done, but you're starting from zero. There's a handicap. They already have 100. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So those things. Oh, now if you're gonna come into a look at the podcasts around you and prepare yourself, if you're coming into a red ocean where there's a lot of competitors per se, you're looking at, you're probably gonna get a bunch of that. But there's a catch there because not everybody is competition. Matter of fact, they can be your stepping stone to get that traction as well. Because the beauty about the podcasting community is it's very collaborative, right? So
Yes.
you can collab with them, and the best way to grow a podcast is to hear it from another podcast. So like what we're doing here, of course, I will share it to my whole thing. So hey, I guested on Roma Miclat's Who Got podcast. Just kidding. So there, and whoever is interested to hear my annoying voice again, then they would probably listen, and then they'd probably stay, and if they like, I'll give you a couple more listeners. Now, if it's a totally blue ocean, that means there's an unserved market. That it's easier to win because there's no incumbent. When I created Hustleshare, there wasn't any podcast about startups. So like, okay, it's wide open, and I have a
I'm
network.
claiming
I'll come
this.
in. Boop, this is mine. There. And it
Oo.
did, right? Now, the pivots that I did was very format related because, again, I was looking at the retention.
Mm.
Back then, prior to this year, I stopped doing intros. Because before, I would do intros or I would record And just in the intro alone, I already lost 20, 30% of my listeners. It's like, okay, people don't like this. I need to stop stroking my own ego and letting them, because I already have, the podcast is hella long already. And I'm
Mm.
going to create another intro. When I remove this, I looked at, will my retention improve? And it did. So as much as I enjoyed doing those things, but people didn't like it, sorry, my ego comes last. Right? So, and I also started experimenting on new things, but not throwing again. I didn't want to do shiny object syndrome anymore. I want to experiment. Can I add another format where it's not interview format anymore, and I didn't have to throw what's already working, and also add with my own take, because majority of the time I'm just the one asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yes.
love giving advice because I felt like, shoot, maybe I can give advice, but nobody came to listen to this episode to hear me talk 60 minutes. So now I want to try and experiment if people li- would want to hear my take. So that's why I created that sub format called Ask Hustleshare, which me giving startup advice to startup founders, blah blah blah. And it worked. It's like, okay, I'll keep doing this then
Mm-hmm.
if people see value. And what makes helps me make that decision is the data. Again, if I don't hit that lucky number that I want with the retention I want, throwing it out the window, never doing it again. Yeah.
Next.
On
Next.
to the next. Ariana Grande. Thank you. Next. Bye.
Thank you.
There you
Next.
go.
So you're saying, Ron, is that what sometimes, because a lot of tips on how to do your podcast properly, yes, it's good. Like you said, doing the intros and all. Kasi yan yung mga mahahanap mo usually, di ba? Tips on how to do your podcast. Tips on how to sound professional podcaster, ganyan, ganyan. Those are the things that you can find online, on YouTube, articles and all. But what you're saying here is, it would really depend on the show and how your show is perceived. Hindi ibig sabihin na it's a cardinal rule that you have to put it, otherwise you will not hit the numbers.
Nope. You have to experiment. And
Mhm.
growth takes time. So don't play the FOMO effect, okay? Because
Yes.
people that flex again, remember the flex rule. Flex objectively when you're trying to get things that will help you and the people that surround you. Not just for the sake of flexing, where it's a dick measuring contest, right? A lot of
I like
people
that.
sometimes in they're just a 3 incher and they're flexing like they have a 12 inch, right? So you want to make sure that you have big dick energy. I hate to say
Yeah.
it, but the big dick energy is like, what you bring to the table, and you want to be able to provide value, not just to say, "Hey, I'm number one again. I'm number whatever."
Mm.
Those are vanity metrics. The key metrics that you should be looking at are, again, quality metrics, retention, and are you growing your listenership base? And there's another special one:
Mm.
call to action. Get them to follow you on whatever podcast app they're listening to. Because when they follow, that's their commitment that they want to hear you again. It's like the YouTubers, right?
Yes.
The subscribe button, ring the bell button below,
Smash
whatever.
that button. Ganyan,
Smash it.
ganyan.
Don't do it if you want to do it on Spotify. You're probably gonna break your phone, but go ahead. There. So it's those things. Then
Yeah.
work on gradually improving that. If
Mm.
and pick your number that's comfortable for you. Is it 10% month on month growth, 20% month on month growth? Then work the numbers back. How do you achieve it? We I'll even I'll share some PNA secrets. Okay, if you're listening to this podcast page,
Ipanghuhook ko
we
yan.
there you go.